Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. Welcome to a very unusual episode of the Intimate Marriage Podcast. If this is your first time listening, a warm welcome. You're in for a pretty juicy treat. If you are a regular listener, I'm so glad you're back. And I just want to tell you that this episode is really going to be quite different from other episodes. So let me set the stage. In August of 2022, I was invited to be a guest on the Jennifer Kaylo Ruscin Podcast. I checked it out and saw that all of her episodes focus on polyamory, on the swinger lifestyle, on dating other people outside the marriage, dating couples, all kinds of edgy and highly varied situations. So I kind of wondered, do I actually want to be on this podcast? But I really liked this woman and her energy when I listened to a few of the shows. So I decided to go ahead, and we had a really amazing conversation. And let me explain to you what happened. So she was planning to interview me on uncompromising intimacy and how to really keep your marriage hot, juicy, and super nourishing and erotically gratifying through the years and the decades. However, a week before the interview, something really significant happened for her. This is a woman, Jennifer, who is polyamorous, very sexually adventurous, big appetite, lots of fun, wants to explore all kinds of things. And she told her partner that she wanted to date this couple, friends of hers who are swingers, meaning they have sex with lots of people besides one another as well. And her partner, who is okay with flirting and kind of fun, sexy socializing, basically flipped out and said, no way. And so this woman was left with basically 3 choices. One is to disregard her partner's preferences and just go for it, knowing that it would really blow up her relationship. She could just end the relationship in order to pursue these desires, but her big desire is to be in partnership with this wonderful man named Scott. And then there's the third option where she basically just dials down her own desires, compromises, gives up on what she wants, and adjusts and accommodates to participate in the relationship on his terms. And so a week before she was going to interview me, she had made the decision to go with the third option, basically feeling like this big, juicy, sexually adventurous woman needed to contain herself in a small box so that it would work for her partner. When she told me that, I suggested, and she was very enthusiastic, that instead of her interviewing me, we would take the opportunity for me to coach her, because I immediately knew that she felt stuck and trapped, and there actually is a lot more spaciousness and connection possible for the two of them while they each could be in integrity with what they desire. So today's episode of the Intimate Marriage Podcast is the recording of me coaching Jennifer Kaylo Ruscin on her podcast as she navigates this issue of having so much desire for other sexual adventures and having a partner who's a no to all of that. So that's what's going on when she starts the interview and gives an introduction to who I am. And so we're going to transition right into that right now.
Welcome to today's podcast. Today I have Alexandra Stockwell. She is a medical doctor, and some people have dubbed her the intimacy doctor, which is pretty saucy because she's an intimate marriage expert. Now, I have never had anybody like Alexandra on the podcast so far. Typically, we're all about open relationships and opening up, and what does that look like? Alexandra is actually a specialist in the opposite. So if you are married and you need some spice in your marriage, if you are married and your sexual intimacy is declining, if you are married and you want to stay married, Alexandra is your person. Would you please introduce yourself to everybody on the show today?
Yes, thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm really glad to be here. You know, there's one thing that I would actually adjust in what you said, because my focus is on long-lasting marriage, on long-lasting committed relationship. Mm-hmm. And I entirely do not address in my website, in my marketing, in any of the messaging that I do or branding, you won't actually find commentary one way or the other about open relating and its many flavors or not. It's actually very interesting to me because I've had a number of Christian, I would put Christian in quotes, not because I'm questioning their religious devotion, but there's certain Christians who've claimed that marriage is, I don't need to explain this to the audience. I'm being very careful in how I say this because I was on a pretty raunchy podcast and I shared it with my list, and I know my email list consists of a whole range of different people. I have some very religious people. I have some extremely not, and lots of people in between. And so when I shared the link to this podcast, knowing that many of my readers would really love to listen, I said, and if you're Christian, don't listen because the language is not sanitized and don't listen. And then I had a reader respond and said, I wasn't offended. I understand why you say that, but I am Christian. I love blowjobs and I love giving blowjobs. It was from a woman, and I am clear that God has given us all kinds of sexual acts. So that's why I was kind of stumbling in how I was talking about the many Christians who encounter my work and assume that I am Christian and define marriage as something that happens between a man and a woman and all of that. And I'm extremely respectful of that approach, but I myself am actually Jewish. So there's so much about the assumptions that aren't correct. And so this is just fun to hear you say, that I'm about monogamous marriage. And in a way I am, but not in the sense of closing to open marriage. It's more that what I'm focused on is making the primary relationship hot and juicy. So I just wanted to clarify that. I have straddled many different worlds. And I think one of the things that I bring as a coach is access to the delicious, mysterious, explicit underbelly of sensual and sexual connection. And I talk about it with doctors and lawyers and CEOs and stay-at-home moms and just people who would never find themselves in any of the places that I've trained, but are really glad to turn up the heat and feel cherished and nourished and gratified in their relationship.
It feels really yummy. And so I think today's podcast is going to be very different. Alexandra and I talked for several minutes before we started. And are you ready for me to kick this off?
I am.
Okay. So I'm going to be completely honest and raw on this podcast. And I have been a huge proponent for polyamory and swinging. I have friends that are in swinging and open relationships. And sometimes we are forced to make a decision with our partner. Sometimes we have a partner who is not into that. And so we're forced to make a choice to be in an open relationship or to be in a monogamistic relationship. And I was forced with that question this week. I had to make a decision. And so I'm excited to have Alexandra on today. And we're going to do a bit of more of a coaching style because I know I'm not the only one. I have a lot of coaching clients that come to me 25 years in, which you've been married 26 years and have 4 kids. They're usually in your boat and they're saying, I'm bored. I've been married forever. I have one client that they have only had sex with each other in 25, 26 years, never tasted anything outside the relationship. And so they get a little angsty and they get curious and they want to know what's outside. And that's not necessarily my experience. I've had 2 ex-husbands and have great relationships with both. We consciously parent all the children together. We all get along and it's very different. But sometimes you want to stay inside the relationship. And so while I haven't been with Scott for 25 years, we've been together a year now. And I want to make the decision for us to stay together as a family. It changes things, right? So Alexandra, I'm going to toss this back to you so we can kind of pick up where we started before we hit record.
Okay, that sounds good. And first of all, just thank you for being real and being willing to talk about this incredibly tender tension in choosing between a relationship which requires monogamy and your heart and genital yearning for something very different. Before we go into that, I just want to establish one concept. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to step back from the coaching energy and just say that throughout the Western world, probably the whole world, the most common relationship advice that is given is that you need to compromise. If you want a great marriage, compromise is the way to do it. Compromise is what it takes to be happy. Mm-hmm. That is completely wrong. If you want a bland, pleasant companionship, then compromise is absolutely the recipe to get you there. But if you want a dynamic, passionate, juicy, intimate marriage, then uncompromising intimacy is essential. And I need to define uncompromising because uncompromising does not mean you always get your way. I'm not saying the way to a great relationship for you now is to say, you know what, I'm sorry you're uncomfortable, but I'm going to do this and I'll be back at midnight, Mm-hmm. No, I'm not suggesting that at all. Because from compromise to being a dominant bully is not anything I would ever advocate. However, where compromise is basically, for many people, it's not expressing. For you, it's not acting on, but I'm going to go with expressing so it's more clear what I'm saying. That compromise is not expressing what you desire, what you dream of, what your internal challenges are, so your partner is more comfortable. And when it comes to being uncompromising, the key is to bring all of who you are, to be able to say anything and have your partner hear it. Then what happens remains to be seen. But when it comes to which restaurant you go out to eat at, when it comes to where you live, whether the relationship is open or closed, like if you both share the truth of what is happening inside you, then together you can make a decision. And it is a completely different thing to end up doing something or not doing something you want to when you feel heard, seen, received in your wholeness, even if the thing doesn't happen, when it comes to polyamory or monogamy, it's very intense and we'll get into it. But there's so many, actually men also, but women in a very particular way, who are compromising all day long, you know, in terms of what they serve for dinner, in terms of like, I could just compromise after compromise after compromise. And in fact, the result is that when a couple becomes my client and I say, well, what do you want? It very often the woman doesn't know. And I'll say, you know, she'll say a bunch of things that's good for the family, that's good for her husband, you know, in a heteronormative context. And I'll say, yeah, but what do you want for you?
She doesn't even know.
She just doesn't know. So my book is called Uncompromising Intimacy. I have lots of podcasts about it on the Intimate Marriage Podcast. But this concept, I just want that to be known by anyone listening to our coaching now, that that's where I'm coming from. And it's not about getting your own way all the time, but it's also not about closing off, like amputating parts of yourself in order to be in the relationship. Because if you have amputated parts of yourself, that's dramatic, but it's actually real.
Yeah.
Then there's no magic switch to flip when you get to the bedroom to be fully expressed and available for connection. And you bring all of yourself for the most passionate moments. That's just not available. It is in a one-night stand. It is early in dating. You don't even have to know your partner's name and you can have an amazing sexual experience. But when you have a life together and you're in a committed relationship, everything which isn't sex essentially functions as foreplay, bringing you closer together or creating more barriers. So do you have any questions before I now coach you out of those principles? Just the coaching will be more meaningful with that.
No, I'm excited because I feel like I've been indoctrinated about compromising. My mother was hugely into, we have to make a compromise. We have to make a compromise. I have to make a compromise. And I watched her, sever limbs, metaphorically, to be the perfect little wife or whatever husband she had at the time. And wow, I feel not brainwashed, but like neurally wired to think about being in relationship with anyone that way. So I'm excited to see how you can reprogram us.
Okay, good. So let's dive in. And the first thing that has my attention is how you've communicated with your partner about wanting polyamorous experiences, not what you've communicated, but how. So will you say something about that?
Sure. I would say a big way is I am very public about opening my marriage last fall, being polyamorous for months and months and getting to kind of taste the rainbow. I don't think I've ever hidden the fact that I am polyamorous. I think that he thought that would go away and that I would just become monogamous. And so what I'm finding, because I didn't know the answer to this either, but what I'm finding after almost a year together is that piece of me doesn't just go away. It's still there. It yearns to love other people. In addition to him, I have such capacity for love. It's ridiculous. It's huge. And so I've said all of this to him. We've had multiple conversations. We have a polyamorous therapist. So we've worked super in depth, and I have been very clear, and I have been uncompromising in the level of clarity and depth that I have gone, and speaking what I desire and what I request and what I want.
And do you feel that he has been present enough to receive it and understands what you're saying? I mean, I'm sure he understands each word, but I mean that he, like, if you asked him, what is this desire I have, that he could share it with you in a way that you would be like, yes, That's it.
Maybe
Even if he's a
not.
no.
I think because it, when it goes through his wiring, it comes out as you want to fuck a lot of people.
Got it.
Which is not the same.
No. So the reason that I just adore uncompromising intimacy and what it opens is that before any decision is made, the two of you have what I'm going to non-judgmentally call a communication problem. Because what you desire is clear to you, but he's not actually hearing what that desire is. And he's a no to something. And there's a context for that no, which you may be aware of, but I'm not hearing it at all in what you're saying. I'm only hearing his limitation in receiving you. I'm not hearing what you're receiving about who he is. That is important as the two of you navigate this.
So are you asking me about my clarity about what he actually wants versus me?
Yeah, let's start there.
I feel very clear about that. So Scott is a very monogamistic, kind of old school kind of guy. So he believes that intimacy is shared through sexual relations. Cock inside vagina equals ultimate intimacy. The opposite for me would be intimacy means sharing, well, for our intimate bond, it's for us sharing a life together. It's us sharing house together and chores together and kids together and making dinners together and snuggling together on the couch and all these things that like make our relationship so juicy and so delicious. And you notice that I didn't one time say amazing sex, which we have amazing sex. But for me, that particular piece, which is so important to him, is like out here in the field, where for me, intimacy is all the other things outside of sex. Sex is just kind of a byproduct of amazing relationshiping.
Okay, well, he's attracted to you.
Yes.
He responds to the amazing, juicy woman you are with a lot of range. So it's important to remember that. He's not, like, if he wanted something more conventional, more cock, vagina, one-to-one, like, there are many women who would provide participating in that model. So he was drawn to you. And as you shared in one of your other podcasts in the Sexcapade one, like from the very first date, you were clear about just how juicy and sexual you are. So let me just step back a little bit to provide a few more intellectual understandings. One is that I really believe that personal relationships, specifically the intimate primary one, is the ultimate vehicle for personal growth.
Amen. I totally agree.
And so if it's attachment, you know, if it's nervous, anxious attachment or something like that, then we know that we're going to be activated in the relationship, and there's an opportunity for rewounding or healing and transformation. Obviously, in your work, you facilitate the healing and transformation. That's what I do. But I'm very clear that, like, when things are going to arise, and it's, do you want to essentially suffer and regress to the childhood wounding, let's just say, or to slow down, see what's at play, really be connected with yourself and your partner, and allow a new experience to emerge. So we know that this is true in many different areas in relationship. You know, like it could arise when it comes to whether the bed is made every morning. Like anything can trigger this. But when it comes to sexuality and polyamory, then it's easy to look at it actually with a more fixed mindset. And I know there is all of the biology, some people are monogamous. That's just how they are. Some people are polyamorous or, whatever it is, that's just how they are. And there's a lot of truth there, but there's also truth in that in this moment, the two of you have hit against some kind of wounding. At least he has, but my guess is you have too, even if I am not able to say exactly what in this minute, because it wouldn't impact you in this way if it didn't. So before I say more, let me just ask, what are you hearing in what I've just said?
More than I have in like 2 straight years of therapy. This is amazing. This is so juicy. I love what you're saying about kind of the relationship being the playground for growth, and that we get to choose to sit in our misery and be angry and anxious and unhappy, or we choose to get to do the work. And you mentioned the attachment style, which is hilarious because our poly therapist just this last week gave us the quiz. And so we both did the quizzes. And I can tell you automatically what mine was. The pieces that were, and I'll attach the link to this so you guys can check it out in the notes. It was a really interesting quiz, and that you have to go through the attachment style or the attachment that you feel towards your father, towards your mother as 2 separate entities. They're not just your parents, and your partner. And I could not believe the level of, I'd never sat and thought, do I go to my dad when I have hard things in my life? Do I feel like my mother will show up for me? Do I feel like my partner will leave me? And have to honestly answer these questions. And then you have a range. It's like 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. And I definitely feel triggered that he will leave me. We talk about this often. It's a trigger for both of us. When he gets overwhelmed, he says, it's just easier for me to be single with my dog and live alone. This is too hard. And he shuts down. I'm done, ready to go. And then I'm the one that's on the other side, like, no, we can do this. We can figure this out. Please don't leave me. Please don't leave me. Please don't leave me. So we both definitely have this leave me attachment wounding that seems to just kind of go in this circular loop of me like, please don't leave. And him like, I'm just going to fucking leave. Please don't leave.
Okay, well,
neither of us want to leave, right? We don't want to break up.
Jennifer, I just want to point out, I think this was based on what you said before we started recording, but you and your partner are in exactly that same dynamic on this issue right now. He's like, this is too hard. If you don't make it easy for me, I'm out of here. And you're like, no, don't go. I'll make it easy for you.
Yeah. So like I lay over dead. I'm like, like dead bug pose.
Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah. What comes up?
I don't know. I don't think I ever looked at it like this. You're right.
So I want to, if I were coaching you, I would, like, you were my client, I would want to really sit in this moment a lot longer than I'm going to do in the podcast, because what I actually want to do is get to the arc of the whole resolution, even if I'm not going to guide you through that entirely right now, but I'll name the milestones.
And by the way, quick side note, I'm really happy that we're doing this because we keep going in this cycle, in this loop, even with our own therapist. And she'll be like, then you got to break up. And I'm like, there has to be another solution. Like there has to be some kind of middle ground or some other option that we're not aware of that can ease the tension and ease the angstiness between, you're right, this loop that we're in.
Right. Because when that attachment tension loop is around sexuality, it is really existentially complicated in a way that it isn't when it's about which car you're going to buy.
I bet.
But it is the same loop. And so let me just say that my program, the Aligned and Hot Marriage, is laying out all of the tools for any kind of situation. I don't actually talk about non-monogamy in the program, but it all applies, and it applies whether it's about what car or the situation that you're in. So I just want to say that step number one for both of you, however, you can go first when it comes to growth and change. Yes, we want our partner to change first and make it safe for us to change, but somebody's got to go first. And if you're listening, make it be you. So,
Okay.
And that is to cultivate curiosity. There is so much more about his no that you haven't accessed yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm guessing, but he's not here to confirm or deny. So I know that this is conjecture, but there's something about his sense of himself as a man, about what it would mean for him if he couldn't satisfy his woman.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's, if I don't know what his career is or what his financial earnings are, but that's going to be wrapped up in all of this too. And like, there's so many existential things. You're basically, with the beauty of your desire, asking him to become somebody different than he knows himself to be. Now, that doesn't mean that it would be different than he truly is. I was very deliberate in how I said that, but it's asking him to become someone different than who he knows himself to be. And the thing is that there are all kinds of tragedies that happen in the world, and we become someone we didn't know ourselves to be when we have a death, or I live in California where houses burn down more often than not, than is standard, and that changes one's identity. Like, there are many things, or an illness, but this is something where it feels like there's volition, that he can choose. And it's very rare that people choose to transform their sense of themselves voluntarily. So what I would say is one of the most important things for you to put your attention on is how to make it safe for him to change without having an agenda that he changes. Like, it's more of an invitation. And for the next phase, however long that is, have all of your conversations be ones where your primary goal is to listen generously. So if right now he says, no way, and gets up because it's just too much, then your goal is for 5 more minutes of peaceful conversation. And once that is what the two of you do, then have it. In other words, when he feels fully received exactly how he is, that in itself is such a healing experience, and paves the way for him to receive who you really are. But right now, that's too confronting for him. Tell me what you're feeling or thinking now.
That's really beautiful. I love the idea of it being an invitation. Like, it's an invitation to consider this thing, or it's an invitation for you to tell me how you feel, and I'll sit and just hold space for you.
Yeah. And
with no ulterior motive.
And that takes a lot of emotional intelligence. You may need to, at one point, when you feel your blood boiling, despite your intentions of neutrally and generously receiving him, you say, I'm so grateful you're speaking. I just need a moment. Like, you need to, don't make this conversation a form of compromise. You still need to prioritize your own needs. But the way I often talk about this with any kind of issue, but certainly this one, is to focus on the connection more than the content. You'll get to the content, but the primary place to have your attention is how open your hearts are and how connected you are. And when you catch it starting to close, to slow down. Or maybe that's enough for that conversation for that moment. But the potency of curiosity, where you only ask if you're actually interested and you're ready to listen generously and not judge the answer, that is one of the secret sauces that opens up so much. And even though I don't need to say this to you right now, for anyone listening, I do want to go on and say that I often have people ask me, like I had this one client who had been married for 5 years, loved her husband, but the sex was boring and that was really important to her. And they got divorced because of that. And then she was with her next partner, this fabulous man in a great relationship. 5 years in, their sex was good, but she was concerned because she said, I just love novelty. Like, how is this going to work? Mm-hmm. And my response to her was, in the context of long-term committed relationship, novelty is totally different than at the beginning. It's not about new positions or, going through the Kama Sutra or something like, no, it's a level of depth where you know one another's bodies so well and your attention is so mindful and sensual that the smallest micro adjustment, like let's say my husband and I are having sex and we'll just go with he's on top of me. It sounds nice and conventional. And he might make the tiniest adjustment in position and suddenly there are fireworks. We have discovered a whole new stratosphere of sensation. And that continues to happen for us, not every time, but enough. And the only context for those kinds of tender, curious, totally deep, intimate moments is because the rest of the time we're aiming to have the kinds of conversations and using the tools that I teach that I'm inviting you to use when you communicate with Scott.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Like, look for the microcosmic adjustments, which my Scott is very much like what you guys are doing. Very in tune, very intuitive, even in the bedroom, very much like, what if I do circular thrusting? What if I do this other thing? Like, what if we, so it is very spicy and fun, but I hear what you're saying, even on a deeper level.
Well, I don't know if is he going to listen to this podcast?
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, he'll be making audiograms for me.
Okay. Well, with total respect that he gets to be king of his own soul and body and priorities. So I say this with respect, but I think based on what you've said so far, not today, not tomorrow, but there absolutely is a possibility where he feels so fully received in who he is. Mm-hmm. And through that receives you so fully that he even says, okay, I don't know how I'm going to feel until we discover, but let's see what happens when you go for this. Now, I have no illusion that there's a lot of profound, complex territory between where you are now and getting to that point. But when couples learn to be uncompromising in the way that I'm talking about, mm-hmm. the intimacy and the trust and the self-awareness is expanded, and then things become possible that just were not possible before. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of a couple that I'm coaching now, and she thought she didn't like to be touched. And it's been very painful for both of them because he really wants to touch. And what's come out, they've been together, I forget right now if it's 15 years or what it is, it's that she needs a particular kind of touch to enjoy it. And she didn't know it until I listened deeply and asked questions. And he certainly had no idea and is perfectly glad to make the adjustment. He just didn't know. But the reason that I'm telling this is that 15 years in, they never would have dreamed that they could find a togetherness that isn't compromised and works for both of them. And we're still in process to discover how much that is, but they now have a whole new hope and clarity about what was at issue that they didn't know before. And that really just comes from curiosity.
And communication.
Yeah.
Her being able to say, yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that because just this morning we were laying in bed and I said, what makes you touch me, in a really light, sensual way versus apply pressure or use some fingernails or just the very tips of your fingers? How do you know? Because it's always perfect. And he says, I don't know. It just feels really intuitive. My body is so connected with yours. It just knows how you want to be touched in that moment. And I'm sure there's some more sciencey stuff behind all of that, but I like that you brought
I love
that up.
that description. I want to correct something I said earlier that all it takes is curiosity. What I really mean is that's where it begins. It doesn't only take curiosity, but that is foundational and where it begins. But when I hear you talk about the intuitive way that he touches you, I have this image in my mind that when it comes to polyamory, it's a place where right now you're not touching one another. And that disconnection, I don't mean because of the nature of polyamory, I mean in a soul sense, you're not touching one another there.
Yeah, it's true.
And so another way to talk about the same thing we've been talking about so far is to find the way to feel like you're connecting and touching on this issue too. And when that happens, there is a synergistic wholeness and integration because the two of you have this beautiful connection. And then this part being a source of disconnection is a dramatic difference. And when you learn to be connected there, this is before taking any action with anybody. That's not the point. But when you learn to be connected there so that you can have a loving conversation and you both feel seen and heard and that you're seeing and hearing the other one and you cherish one another in connection in relation to polyamory and monogamy, then any choice that the two of you make and any choice that you personally make, Jennifer, is going to feel totally, totally different than if you end up, or as you have, chosen not to be polyamorous as a form of compromise and needing to just drop a part of yourself at the door when you come home. In other words, I don't have any particular agenda in whether or not your relationship together is polyamorous or monogamous, but insofar as I have an agenda, it's that your whole self can be welcome in the relationship and his whole self can be welcome in the relationship. And then again and again and again, creative solutions that work for everybody become available because you shift into possibilities and more ease rather than armoring protection and defensiveness.
Yes, which is more this than hunkering down. And as you've been saying all of this, I think also that it's important to say, and now I can see I can see a way forward now. I think it's important to say it's been interesting in our journey because he has been open to some play. We have played with friends. We just got back Saturday from a swinger Halloween event where it was pretty tame. We had dinner together as a big, huge group. We had board game play, saucy board games. It was a fun environment, and that you could, get a little drunk, and, you could touch your partner in a way that you couldn't in an Applebee's, right? Or whatever. Is that even still open? Red Lobster? I don't know. Normal family, dinner event out in public. And it's been fun to watch him start to play a bit more in my world, where it's much more open and it's okay to be sexual or show your sexuality. And just kind of watch and see what happens. I think my favorite thing out of this podcast so far is then the way that you teed this up at the beginning. When you said, when you met him, he knew you were very highly sexual. He knew what you were doing. He knew that you were in open relationships, and he fell in love with you, specifically you. To have a penis and vagina relationship or act with any other woman could be not only highly possible, but easy. And he could choose that, but instead he's chosen kind of this highly complex woman to want to be in relationship with.
His soul was called to you as well as his body.
That's so sweet. And then to go and a relationship with a partnership with someone is the best, what we believe to be a perfect playground to release childhood traumas and work through the hard shit in your life and, learn all of these lessons together. And then the next piece that you talked about was like, then you get to choose, do you want this to be really hurtful and harmful, not harmful, but hurtful and angsty? Or do you want to take your relationship and your partnership that you're with in someone and choose to use that playground to work through all of this stuff together in love, in sitting down and being completely open to hold space with your partner and ask them what's going on in their life, or ask them particular questions without an agenda and listen and hold space. And that's probably the part where we are sticky and where we need to work on, is how can we freely and openly communicate with each other without judgment, without feeling completely triggered, holding space and really understanding each other in love, even if it's not completely 100% aligned with what we believe ourselves to be the way we want to show up in the world, or our partner, or whatever preconceived notions.
Yeah, I love so much that you said that. And I have two different things I want to say. One is that having a fantastic relationship, having a relationship where it really is alchemical and a place for personal growth, is a learnable skill. And it is exactly why I provide the education, because where else is somebody going to learn this? But it is a learnable skill. That's the thing I really want to emphasize. It's not like you either got it or you don't. No, it is a learnable skill. And we don't have role models that show what this looks like, but it is totally possible. And it's really what the Aligned and Hot Marriage is designed for, even though I'm not talking about monogamy or polyamory. I'm talking about how to be whole with yourself and your partner and navigate what comes up along the way. So you've been together a year. Of course you don't have this nailed down and checked off. And I'm going to transition back to just me, Alexandra, speaking now. If you want to hear the rest of the episode, you can head over to my YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the show notes. You can also just find me, Alexandra Stockwell, on YouTube, and you can listen to the entire interview there. It's pretty long, longer than I like to do my episodes on the Intimate Marriage Podcast. So if you're intrigued, just listen to the rest of it on my YouTube channel. In the meantime, whether you're in an open relationship or you're in an extremely monogamous relationship, always have been, always will be, I hope there was something for you in what you've just heard. One of the reasons that I shared this coaching session is that the tools that I teach, the 6 keys to an intimate marriage, the principle of being uncompromising, all of the things that I teach, they apply if you want to feel more connection, more emotional intimacy, more erotic gratification in your relationship, whether it is your marriage and you are not looking at anybody else in the world besides your spouse, or you're in an open relationship, romantically involved with other people, whatever your situation is, the principles that I teach are the way to increase your self-awareness, increase your availability for connection, and dive into a more nourishing relationship with your spouse. So I really hope that you got something from this episode, because what you've heard is relevant regardless of the particular context that you yourself choose to live in. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and please leave a rating and a review. And if you're ready to deepen your relationship and create a truly intimate, delicious, and vibrant marriage, head over to the Work With Me page at alexandrastockwell.com and choose the program that's right for you.